Hello listeners and welcome to the Montel Weekly podcast. This is a special edition from eWorld in Essen. We're bringing you the most topical energy matters in an informal setting. My name is Richard Sverrisson and it's a great pleasure and an honor to have Trevor Sikorski of Energy Aspects with me today. Welcome, Trevor.
Thank you very much, Richard, and a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, perfect. We're going to talk about gas today, Trevor. It's one of your specialist subjects. Just to kick us off, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's happened so far to markets and to prices this year.
Yeah, 2020 always looked like it was going to be a very, very testing time for the global gas market. A lot of gas has come into the market in the last couple of years, a lot of supply. Demand has been very, very good in a couple of years, but certainly over 2019 and going into 2020, global demand looked very, very weak. And so what we've seen is this culmination of lots and lots of particularly new LNG coming into the market, the US shale gas revolution really being exported through that into a global market that's done its best to absorb that gas, but this year really, really struggling to do so. And then what we've seen, I think, is we have had a very, very mild winter, and that being a mild global winter. So we've seen, a very warm period in Europe, a very warm period in Asia, and a very warm period in North America. So with nowhere in the world really having very, very high heating demands for gas, gas has just become very, very distressed almost, and we've seen prices just drop off and be very, very low for the time of year, but low in absolute terms, amongst the lowest prices we've probably seen in the last decade.
Okay, and where are they at the moment? I thought if we start in Asia and Europe, in Asia they're below almost $3 MMBTU and approaching 250.
Yes, and that spread between generally the JKM, that big Asian price marker, pricing it from Japan and Korea, against the European hubs, the TTF, that tends to always trade at a premium, but that premium has come down and has come down and has come down, and is at some of the narrowest levels we've seen. So that Northeast Asian market has been very, very weak and is pricing very, very close to the Europeans now. And those European prices, in turn, closing very, very close to the US ones. So we've seen this global convergence on very low price levels, everything below $3, getting below 250, and you're probably looking at a summer where you're going to see global prices, both Europe, both Asia, and the US, of course, around $2 or lower.
Do you think that's going to be my next question? Is this sustainable? Are these prices going to last the rest of the year?
Well, I think it's very hard to see something that's really bullish, that's really going to change the supply and demand fundamentals for 2020. It just looks very, very oversupplied. Europe's going to end with very high levels of gas and storage. They'll end this winter with historical highs. You're looking at a very high carryout in US storage as well. And the Asians just don't have very much storage anyways. And what they have is largely full. So it is going to be a real test to see what we can do with what is still, robust supply coming into the market, increasing numbers of LNG volumes coming into the market, two big new trains still to come up in the US, two trains just turning on at the moment in the US. It just is a lot of supply continuing, demand really lagging behind, and those prices are going to have to signal, to supply that it needs to start turning down.
So even more is coming into the market. Where is the demand then?
Well, and that's the thing. And over the last couple of years, the Chinese market has been very good at being the kind of backstop for global gas. A lot of gas going into that market. We saw it slow in 2019. A lot of that slowed down a little bit on weather. It's 2 mild winters in a row, but a lot of it in industrial production. So much demand it goes into industrial production. That slowed down a lot in China because of the trade war. And now on top of it, you have coronavirus-inspired problems. And you are starting to see already a lot of force majeure on LNG that's supposed to go into China.
That was going to be my next question, Trevor. The coronavirus, we've seen numbers out there, 20 to 40% drop in demand for oil and gas in China. The outlook this year, just generally dropping massively. What's your view on the impact of the coronavirus?
Well, I think it's making a weak market even weaker, because it's just saying to an LNG market that's struggling to balance, here's a lot of additional cargoes that we thought we had demand for, and we no longer have demand. And when you look at how many could be, we've already heard of something like 10 to 12 cargoes having force majeure
10 or
called
12.
on them. 10 or 12 is high. I mean, that was one report we saw in the FT. We've seen more confirmed amounts that were a bit lower than that, 4 or 5. We've heard that Total and Shell pushing back a little bit. I mean, there are suppliers into that market pushing back a little bit on the Chinese.
So they're like rejecting
rejecting an FM.
Yeah.
So it is going to be messy, but there is going to be a lot of those volumes kind of floating around. And what those volumes are probably going to do is they'll absorb any kind of spot, let's say, demand that's in Asia. Could be a little bit distressed there and drive the JKM very low. But it will also push, I think, Qatari gas into the European market, and of course that makes the European market just more supply into another market which is struggling to absorb the amount of supply coming its way.
Absolutely. So it's all pointing downwards pretty much.
So everything's, at the moment, it does seem like it's a storm of stuff that's become very bearish, pushing downwards, and does hold out a full summer of very, very low, quite distressed gas prices. And probably that will spill a bit into the further winter as well.
So these vessels that are, reacting to force majeure by the Chinese, where are they going? I mean, where are they heading?
And that is the question. And so, you will kind of see the Australians either needing to actually stop producing. A lot of it's, Australian LNG going into the Chinese market. Okay. Either those are going to have to stop producing that gas because there's just no market, or they're just going to have to, if they're already on a boat and they're floating, they are just going to have to look for a market, and they will price downwards. So there's a lot of downside coming from these force majeures, and it will be, a lot earlier than we expected to see. We expected summer to be very weak, but winter is being, at these kind of summer-ish type low prices. But that does hold out for even lower prices come summertime.
If this coronavirus outbreak kind of constantly eases and we get over the top of that and things improve, do you see that having a bearing on a lot of these vessels or?
Yeah, I think as soon as the Chinese economy gets restarted, if you'd like, their use of gas will pick up, and they'll start taking, but they'll kind of revert back to the schedule of LNG that's already coming in. That's probably what they'll accept. So you won't see further rejections, but those that have been rejected will still just need to find a home, and they will sit there, and they will be a bit of a wait for it'll probably take a couple of months to work through those, but that will keep those Asian prices quite low.
What's happening to these cargoes, in the European market?
Yeah, I think it would take some very low JKM prices to start sending Asian cargoes over. What we're probably going to see, though, is more Qatari, kind of spot Qatari cargoes come into the European market. There's a lot of excess regas capacity in Europe, but most of that concentrated in Spain, in France, and the UK, so the very Western markets. We expect that, so we think the NBP, we think the PEG in France, and we think the Spanish hubs will all price at a discount to the TTF, so they will be low. They'll be low there, and they'll be low everywhere.
So basically, price is going to be historically low all this year. That's what you're saying.
It is going to be a very, very low period for global gas, and really, I think it is the cumulative impact in some ways of US, very, very cheap US gas being exported around the world.
But how are the pipeline operators reacting to this? In recent years, both Norway and Russia have exported record volumes to Europe. How are they reacting to this?
Well, I think this is interesting. 2019, we saw a period where we saw Norway turn down a little bit. By a little bit, they turned down probably about 3 or 4 BCM more than maintenance would have suggested. Right. We saw the Algerian gas being rejected. That tends to be oil index, so out of the money. About 12 BCM coming out of last summer. There is some questions on whether there's much more flexibility on those long-term contracts to even take those takes less. Russia, interesting though, Russia really kind of defended market share last year, sold very heavily on their short-term platform, the electronic sales platform, probably something like 13 or 14 BCM of gas just in the short-term market, something they've never done before. So they were really there, really kind of engineering, let's say, an early price war with the States, or certainly indicated that they wanted to defend market share against LNG. How much they can do that this year will be sorely tested, because those prices will have to go to a point where it gets some form of turndown, and that turndown will be both LNG, we think, being locked in, probably US production, but also other places will see some pressure to turn down, but also we'll need pipes to probably turn down in the European market, and that will be focused probably on those Russian flows.
Right, because we also saw in January record sales on the on Gazprom's electronic sales platform. I mean, I haven't got the number offhand now, but it was it was very high. I mean, what's behind that? What's the can you explain the thinking? What's your interpretation of this kind of strategy from Gazprom?
Sure. I mean, our general feeling, I think, on that is what we saw was very, very sharp turndowns on nominations, right? So a lot of people have a lot of gas in storage, probably want to use some of that gas in storage rather than calling on their long-term contracts. Gazprom has used the ESP to counter turndowns in nominations. But the interesting thing about January is we went through 2019 without really seeing, any material turndown in Russian flows. January itself saw about a 5 BCM reduction in Russian flows into the European market, and that was countered by that over 2 B. That includes that 2 BCM of ESP sales. So selling very, very heavily, but we saw flows go very, very low. And probably the interpretation of that is, one, European participants with storage trying to get rid of some very high historic levels of storage, but also Gazprom itself meeting some of its contract nominations from storage rather than flowing. And so that's been an interesting turndown and a very different approach from Gazprom in January than we saw in all of 2019.
And there's more supply coming as well, because when Nord Stream 2 comes online, the pipe, I mean, that will flood the market yet again. I mean...
there's a bit of additional gas. I mean, some of that is going to be stuff that they, at the moment, send through the Ukraine, so some of it will be diversions. Part of that's because of a difference between where Gazprom has new gas, which needs to flow, and all of its old maturing fields, which is the stuff which tends to go through the Ukraine. So there's a natural reason for that happening. But I mean, they have kind of indicated that maybe 25 BCM of gas that's going to go through Nord Stream 2 will come from flows through the Ukraine. So there is a big chunk of that going to go through. Having said that, there's still about 15 BCM, we think, of brand new gas that they'll want to monetize through from Bovodinkovo. So there is some new gas that can go as well into that market. So.
And how quite controversial is the sanctions on US firms, on firms involved in the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from the US? How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, it's been successful in postponing the completion of the pipe. We expected the pipe to be completed in January of this year. That didn't happen because the pipe layers had to stop because they didn't want to be sanctioned by the US. And that's caused them some problems. And now they're kind of talking about, well, maybe, the pipe will be delayed for the whole year, and it may be early 2021 before they'll get the pipe laying vessels in place that are Russian and can do that, and the above water tie-ins being completed. So there's not that much of the pipeline to actually complete, but getting that last little bit of it, the last 150 kilometers of it built, seems to be very, very, it seems like it will be a problem with those sanctions in place. Once the pipe's up and running, there's not that much you can do about it.
Exactly. Trevor, fantastic. Thank you for a great overview of the gas market. It's a very bearish picture. Look forward to inviting you again on the Montel podcast.
My pleasure, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all from this special gas edition of the Montel Weekly podcast. Thank you again to Trevor. And remember to keep up to date with all our stories on Montel News. Follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thank you. Goodbye.